My name is Gianna Evans. I'm 35 years old, living in Seattle, working as a therapeutic interior designer, and a single mother to a 7-year-old daughter named Ellie. That evening, when I walked into the grand banquet hall for my mother's birthday, people were raising their glasses under a crystal chandelier while I stood there soaked from the rain, voice hoarse from crying the entire way there. I wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to beg for the life of their only granddaughter who was lying on the edge between life and death, missing just $22,000 to undergo heart surgery within the next 36 hours. But instead of holding me, they motioned for security to escort me out of the party. Have you ever been turned away by the very people who gave you life, at the moment you needed them most? Leave a comment if this story stirs something inside you. Tap like if you believe love should never come with conditions. And don't forget to subscribe, because what they didn't expect is exactly what I'm about to do next. I stood still beneath the chandelier, my soaked shoes leaving dark prints on the cream-colored carpet, my head spinning between the sound of classical music and the indifferent glances of people who once called me family. When security grabbed my elbow and pushed me back from the frowning crowd, I didn't resist. As I knew, I was never truly welcome there. I was born into a family where everything had to be perfect. My father, Richard Evans, is a renowned attorney in Seattle. My mother, Cynthia, was once the chairwoman of the donor board at the Contemporary Art Museum. Everything they did, from the suits my father wore to every champagne glass my mother arranged, was meticulously calculated to maintain appearances. And me, I was the ink blot on their pristine blueprint. I remember being 11 years old, redrawing the entire kitchen with colored pencils after my mother said she didn't like how the light hit the dining table. I adjusted the lighting angle, recolored the walls, and added an imaginary window to open up the space. But instead of seeing a child's creativity, my mother threw the drawing on the floor and said one sentence I would never forget: "You draw as badly as your place in this family." I always knew I wasn't like Nathan. My brother was the jewel of the Evans family, always polished, straight A student, got into Harvard without anyone reminding him. While I spent hours in the storage room turning cardboard boxes into miniature rooms with windows and bookshelves, Nathan was taken to dinner parties with judges and Dad's business partners. While I pieced together Lego sets to make calming spaces for my stuffed animals, Nathan gave speeches about the role of the justice system in modern society. I learned to stay quiet to avoid eye contact during family gatherings. But what I can never forget was the night I turned 19. Relatives poured into the house as if it were a major celebration. My mother told me to bring out the tray of donuts and don't say anything that would embarrass the family. During dinner, one of my uncles joked, "What school is Gianna in? Following Nathan into law, I hope?" Before I could answer, my mother smiled and replied with something I've repeated in my head more times than I can count. "Oh, she hasn't done anything substantial. Just likes to doodle and wander around. Doesn't really know what she's doing with her life. She's like a parasite." Everyone laughed. And I stood up, walked to my room, packed a few clothes into my backpack. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. I left that house on my birthday night, carrying nothing but deep wounds and one thought: if I survive, I'll live a life nothing like theirs. I rented a tiny room on the outskirts of town with what little money I made from a part-time job at a coffee shop. I worked during the day, studied interior design at night through free online courses. Sometimes I ate dry bread all week just to save up for a 3D modeling software. But I persisted. 3 years later, I had saved enough to open a small studio specializing in recovery spaces for hospitals, nursing homes, and support centers for children with disabilities. That's when I met Matt, a kind, gentle man who worked as a mechanic. We never got married, but Ellie was born, and she was the greatest gift I'd ever received. In the early years of raising her, I was a mom, a business owner, and a certification candidate all at once. I used to believe that if I tried hard enough, life would somehow reward me. Then the pandemic hit. Contracts were canceled, clients shut down, revenue disappeared. I drained all my savings to keep 2 employees on payroll. Matt got injured in the auto shop while working overtime to afford his mother's medication. A month later, he passed in his sleep from an infection. I lost him and the main source of income. I was left alone with a 3-year-old daughter and a studio drowning in debt. I thought of returning to my parents' house. Not to ask for money, just for a few weeks to recover. But when I called, my mother said bluntly, Your father is preparing for the legal gala. We can't handle more drama right now. I hung up. And I never called again. I believed that as long as Ellie was healthy, I could get through anything. But nothing prepares you for the moment a doctor says your child needs emergency heart surgery. I had held on for so long that there was no one left to ask. So that night, I returned to the house I once called home, where they were throwing a birthday party for the woman who once said I was her only mistake. I came to ask for something I never imagined I would: mercy. But I didn't cry when the guard pushed me out of the hall. I didn't scream when my mother casually said, "Blake is the future of this family. Ellie, she's just an extended accident." I only remembered Ellie lying in that hospital bed, holding tightly onto a crayon drawing of a house with 4 people: Mom, me, Grandma, and Grandpa. And I remembered thinking, no one in that drawing had ever held her, not even once. I stood in the rain for a long time that night. Not because I didn't know where to go, but because I knew one thing for sure: they never loved me. And they would never love my child. But someone will. Even if they don't share our blood. And I will go find them. I'll find people who call Ellie family, not out of duty but out of love. And I will rebuild our lives from the ruins they left behind. No permission needed. No validation from those who once called me a burden. I don't know how, but I will save my daughter. I will not let Ellie grow up only to leave home on her birthday like I once did. I put up my old Toyota for sale. The one I still drove to job sites every day even though the AC had long since failed and the windows had to be cranked by hand. I took off the turquoise earrings Matt had given me after Ellie was born, brought them to the pawn shop down the street. I cleared out every drawer, gathering keepsake jewelry, mementos I had held on to thinking I'd one day pass them down to my daughter. They were all laid out on the kitchen table, a silent goodbye to the life I once tried to preserve. 3 days after that birthday party, I received the appraisal results. Everything I sold amounted to $18,000. I was still $4,000 short. And had less than 2 days left before the surgery deposit deadline. I called the bank. I called 4 more. I printed out my income statements from the past 3 months, added last year's tax return. But every place said no. "We're sorry, your credit file doesn't meet our criteria. We can't approve a loan without collateral. Do you have a cosigner?" By the 5th day, my voice was nearly gone. I didn't dare cry in front of Ellie, but every time I stepped out of her hospital room, I had to lean against the wall just to breathe. Levine remained gentle, but his eyes grew more concerned each day. "We're doing everything we can to keep Ellie stable," he said. "But the surgery really needs to happen as soon as possible. You understand that, right, Gianna?" I nodded, though my mind was completely blank. That night, the rain poured down on the city again. Seattle was always like this. Quiet rains falling steadily, like a sorrow you couldn't quite name. I held Ellie in my arms as she slept, her breathing raspy under the thin blanket. I sat in the small kitchen, the yellow light casting shadows over the table stacked with rejection letters. One had a blurred stamp from where I'd accidentally placed a glass of water. Another still bore the red mark: not approved. I pulled out the wooden chair, sat there with my hand resting on Ellie's side. Her hair smelled faintly of cheap strawberry shampoo. She still had a little bandage on her arm where the 4 had been. I kissed her forehead and whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry. I used to think I was strong. I had raised my daughter alone, built a company from scratch, survived the pandemic, survived Matt's death. I used to believe that if I didn't rely on anyone, no one could disappoint me. But holding a tiny life in my arms, a life with a heart that needed urgent repair, I felt small, like a lost child. If it had been a matter of blood, I would have given it in a heartbeat. But this world didn't want my blood. It wanted money." A loud thunderclap cracked outside. I jumped and drew Ellie closer. My phone buzzed quietly on the table, a message from an old classmate. "I'm really sorry. My family's struggling too." I didn't even finish reading the message. I didn't blame anyone. No one owed me anything. But my heart felt like it was being squeezed. There was a moment I truly considered calling my mother. Just once more. Just to say I'd accept any conditions they set. But my hand hovered over the screen, then slowly dropped. Deep down I knew that door no longer existed for me. And I didn't want Ellie growing up carrying the debt of someone else's pity. I laid Ellie in bed once she started sweating from the fever. I changed clothes, towel-dried my hair, then returned to the kitchen table. I grabbed my notebook and made a list of every place I hadn't called, everything I hadn't sold, every person who might even by 1% be able to help. Then I looked out the window. Rain was still falling. The city lights were still on. Maybe somewhere out there, someone was still willing to reach out. I didn't know who that person would be, but I knew I wasn't going to stop. Because Ellie was asleep behind me. And that little heart of hers hadn't given up. Neither could I. I was crossing off the final names on my list when there was a knock at the door. Not loud but clear. I looked at the clock. Almost 11 at night. The rain hadn't stopped, each drop hitting the awning with a steady rhythm in the quiet. I hesitated for a few seconds, then opened the door. Standing there was Mrs. Pamela Monroe, our neighbor at the end of the row. A widow who lived alone with 3 cats and a lavender garden that always made the alley smell like summer. She wore an old wool coat, holding a dripping umbrella and a thin cream-colored envelope. "You're still up." "Good," she said, then handed me the envelope. "Take this." I opened it, my hands slightly trembling. Inside was a stack of cash, 20s and 50s, not new but neatly arranged. I looked up, stammering. Why would you? You redid my kitchen after the storm 2 years ago," she interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "Didn't charge me a dime. Said it reminded you of your grandmother's kitchen. Now it's my turn." I was speechless. Kitchen. I remembered it well. So old, the walls were cracked, the tiles falling off the floor. I had spent 3 weeks rebuilding it, installing cabinets by hand, cutting glass to fit the window panes. She had cried when she saw the new sink. Said her husband had always dreamed of having one like that before he passed. "You didn't have to do this," I whispered. "No, I didn't," she replied. "But I wanted to." Then she handed me a small box. "His wedding ring. I sold it for $3,000. Don't say anything. Just take it." I couldn't hold back the tears. She gripped my hand, her eyes bright and steady like a tiny lamp in the night. "You're a good person, Gianna. The world doesn't need more brilliant people. What it lacks is kindness. And Ellie, she's going to get her surgery." I held her hand as if it were the only lifeline in the ocean. After she left, I stood frozen at the door. The rain had softened. The porch light cast a glow onto the wet pavement, illuminating the slow roll of her cart down the street. I walked back inside, hadn't even changed clothes yet when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I saw your post on the forum. I don't have much, but I was a single mom too. Check your Venmo." I opened the app. $500 had just been transferred. Then another message from a former client whose son had sensory processing disorder. The room I designed had soft lighting and gentle textures. "Gianna, you probably don't remember me. But my son still sleeps in the room you created. I just sent a little something through Zelle." Then came one from an old college classmate, someone I hadn't spoken to since our senior project. "I remember you lent me your laptop during finals when mine broke. It's my turn now." Each message, each notification was like a tiny spark lighting up the dark. The next morning, I woke up to Ellie whimpering softly. I placed my hand on her forehead, still a slight fever. I gave her medicine, changed the bandage on her arm, and made myself a quick cup of instant coffee. Sitting by the table, I opened my laptop. I wrote a short post. No picture. No real name. Just a story. I'm a single mother. My daughter needs heart surgery within 48 hours. I've sold everything I own. I'm not asking for money. But if a stranger has ever helped you, please think of us. I didn't expect anything. I just needed to write it. To feel like I still existed in this world. But by afternoon, the post had already spread across the single-parent groups in the Pacific Northwest. Someone in Idaho sent a $200 Amazon gift card to buy Ellie something after she recovers. A retired doctor from Oregon messaged me to ask for the hospital's name so he could donate directly to the medical fund. A woman from another state whose child had heart surgery 2 years ago called me at 4 in the afternoon, crying as she said, "I know that feeling. I sat where you're sitting now." I wrote down every name, every gesture in a worn notebook. Each line felt like a thread pulling me back from the edge. That night I didn't sleep. But not out of fear. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone anymore. I wasn't the only one left in the dark. On the kitchen table, the stack of cash grew thicker by the hour. Every dollar, every bill was a tiny piece of love from people who had nothing to gain, only something to give. No one asked if I was worth it. No one made me prove my daughter deserved to live. They just reached out. And I held on. Not because I was weak, but because my child deserves a world where people like this exist. I couldn't remember how long I had sat in the waiting room during the surgery. The clock on the wall ticked forward minute by minute as if mocking me, while it felt like a hand was squeezing my chest from the inside. I clutched the stuffed bunny Ellie always held while sleeping, its ears worn, a pink ribbon around its neck that I had tied there on her birthday last year. Every time I saw a white coat pass by, my heart tightened again. Levine stepped out close to 5 in the afternoon. His face was still serious, but there was a light in his eyes. He removed his mask, walked toward me slowly, and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "The surgery was successful," he said. "Your daughter is much stronger than I expected." I bowed my head into my hands, tears spilling out uncontrollably. His voice stayed even, but there was a faint catch in his throat when he continued, "If we'd been 6 hours later, we might have lost the window of hope." I couldn't speak. I just held his hand tightly, as if gripping the very thread of faith that had just been rescued. They took me to the intensive care unit afterward. Ellie lay in the hospital bed, her tiny face surrounded by tubes, monitors, and machines blinking with steady heartbeats. There was one rhythm I had never heard before, stable and strong. The doctor said I could touch her. I placed my hand on the back of her little hand. Her skin was pale, her warmth faint. Her eyes were closed, and her breaths passed through the oxygen tube like a soft breeze. "Can you hear me, sweetheart?" I whispered. "Mom's right here. I'm not going anywhere." I sat beside her the entire night. The beeping machines no longer scared me. They became a new rhythm of life, slow, real, and full of hope. Every time the monitor displayed a steady number, I wrote a line in the little notebook I carried with me. I called it the Unconditional Love Journal. I wrote down every food package left outside our door with a note, wishing Ellie a speedy recovery, from the Jacob family, 3rd floor. Every short message like, "Praying for your little girl every night," or "You're not alone," was taped inside the notebook cover. I even printed screenshots of every small transaction, $5, $10, $50, each one a silent promise that someone out there still wanted to hold my hand. Mrs. Pamela visited the next day with a pot of chicken soup and a new pair of hand-knitted wool socks. "The room is cold, she needs to keep her feet warm," she said. I didn't ask where she found the time. I just held her hand for a long moment, then let her sit by Ellie's side, reading stories to her as if she were family. An older couple entered the room. I had never met them. The man carried a small lavender plant, and the woman held a giraffe-shaped pillow. "We're friends of Mr. Bill," they said. "He told us you once rebuilt a kitchen for a kind widow. So here we are." I nodded, my throat tight. I didn't need to ask why they came. They were part of something I no longer called luck, but the return of kindness. I had once planted tiny seeds, believing no one noticed. But now they had grown, vibrant and full, in the form of outstretched hands reaching for me just when I thought I was sinking. During the days Ellie was in the ICU, I barely left the room. I lived on coffee from vending machines, soup cups stuffed in my tote bag, and the prayers scribbled on little papers taped around her bed. Each morning I wiped her face, telling her about everyone who had visited, written, or messaged. "You're the reason people are becoming kinder," I whispered. "You're teaching me something I thought I already understood, that family isn't blood. It's whoever stays when you no longer have the strength to call for them." One night I saw a nurse jotting down notes in the hallway. I asked her why everyone here had been so kind to me. She just smiled. "Don't you see? Because you've been kind to others before." I sat quietly, thinking about those nights I stayed up finishing a design for a mother whose child had autism. About the morning I secretly paid for an elderly woman's medication in the same apartment row. About all the things I had done without expecting to be remembered. And then I understood. Sometimes you don't need shared bloodlines. You don't need relatives. You don't need parents who gave you life. What you need is someone who will catch your hand when you fall, and stay when the crowd has turned away. I gently placed my hand over Ellie's chest, feeling her light but steady heartbeat. And I wrote in the notebook. Day 3 post-op. Ellie is still asleep, but her color looks better. Levine says recovery chances are high. Thank you to 482 people who sent coins, hugs, and wishes. Blood didn't show up. But humanity did. I closed the notebook and carefully placed it in my bag. Outside, dawn was breaking. A pale beam of sunlight streamed through the window and landed on Ellie's hand. I placed a soft kiss on it and whispered, "You're going to be okay. I believe." Because for the first time in so many years I knew that belief wasn't just a one-sided hope. It had been proven true by people who didn't need to call me daughter, who didn't need their names on Ellie's birth certificate, yet still quietly saved her with every ounce of love they had. I never thought I'd be back at the drawing table so soon after Ellie's surgery. But 1 week after she was moved from the ICU to recovery, when the ventilator's noise gave way to soft nurse conversations, I picked up my pen again. At first, just a few rough sketches. The windows wider. The walls warmer in tone. A cozy reading corner with soft yellow lights and an elephant-shaped backrest. A quiet spot where parents could sit through the night without curling up on hard plastic chairs. Each line I drew was a memory. And soon I found myself redesigning Ellie's entire ICU room, but the way I had always wished it had been built. I heard about the contest from a design group I used to work with. They sent me the link with a short message. "Gianna, you should try. This project is made for you." It was a call from a regional hospital chain looking to rebuild their post-op pediatric heart units. Budget, $2 million. They were seeking a design that not only served functionality but also brought emotional healing to young patients and their families. I no longer had a company. No office. Just a makeshift desk in a cramped kitchen and an old laptop I once used to build 3D models for my very first client's house. But I still had Ellie. And I still had that unmistakable feeling in my chest. Something I couldn't name but something I knew I had to follow. I worked during every moment Ellie slept. I sketched by hand, took photos, uploaded them to my laptop. I modeled each room with software whose trial version had expired. I had to reinstall it every 3 days. I used real photos of the ICU where Ellie had stayed as a base for my renderings, tweaking each detail, outlet placement for suction machines, light angles that wouldn't shine into a child's face, distances that allowed a mother to hold her child's hand without getting tangled in equipment. And I wrote a handwritten letter. Unpolished, unprofessional. Just the truest words I could offer as a mother. I once sat for 84 hours straight by my daughter's bed in a cold white ICU room, where everything functioned precisely but nothing felt warm. I can't forget the night she woke up and asked, "Why do you look like the shadow in that cartoon, Mom?" Because my face was pale and my eyes were sunken. I don't want the children who come after mine to heal their hearts in rooms that make them feel like patients. I want them to feel like they're coming back to life. I sent the design along with the letter late on the final day of submission. No expectations. No hopes. Just the peace of knowing I had done everything I could. 3 days later, while I was making tea for Pamela in the kitchen, my phone rang. "Hello, this is Linda Hartman, chair of the design panel for the Montana Heart Recovery Center. I'm calling on behalf of the entire committee to let you know. Your design made us pause longer than any other submission." I tightened my grip on the kettle, hearing the water inside boiling. "Could you come to Seattle next week to present your idea? You're one of the 3 finalists." I heard my own voice say, "Yes, I'll be there." Pamela placed a hand on my shoulder as I hung up. Her eyes were filled with both emotion and calm. "I told you, the world's not done with you yet." The presentation was held on the 3rd floor of a glass building in downtown Seattle. The same building I used to walk past when delivering drawings as an assistant to a senior architect. This time I came alone. I wore a white button-down Pamela had ironed for me, and a hair clip with hand-drawn flowers from a little girl in the recovery unit. When I walked in, the 2 other candidates were already there. One represented a 60-person design firm. The other was from a nationwide architectural corporation. They had banners, polished slideshows, and thick printed portfolios. I had a large drawing board, a mini projector, and Ellie's unconditional love journal. When it was my turn, the room fell silent. I didn't begin with credentials or numbers. I began with a sentence. "I don't have a company. I just have a child who was saved by people who share no blood with me. And I want to build a space where that kind of love doesn't just survive. It multiplies." I unveiled the design. A space where walls change color with the time of day, fold-out chairs turn into beds for parents, and a corner library holds storybooks annotated by former patients. A small garden in the center where children can grow plants during recovery. And a large digital board displaying daily messages of encouragement from the community. I didn't feel nervous. My voice was steady because I wasn't speaking from expertise. I was speaking from lived experience. As I closed, I opened Ellie's journal and read one line. The day Ellie woke up after surgery, she asked why so many strangers loved her. I said, because you made them believe in kindness again. There was a pause in the room. Then the eldest judge gave a small nod. I closed the journal, bowed, and walked out like someone stepping from shadow into sunlight. I didn't know who they'd choose. But I knew that this time I was no longer just a forgotten name in a sea of submissions. I was someone carrying a heart that had survived ruin, and was now building a whole new world around it. I was standing backstage at the National Exhibition Hall in Chicago when my phone buzzed. On the screen was a message from Linda Hartman. Gianna, congratulations. They chose you. I didn't respond immediately. I looked down at my hand, still damp with nerves, then took a deep breath. As I stepped onto the stage, the lights blazed across the room, but I wasn't afraid anymore. In front of me sat hundreds of architects, investors, and healthcare design experts. Behind them, a large screen displayed the words, "Built from the heart, a mother's story." I didn't read from a script. I shared. I once sat in that little room for 84 straight hours, praying for every heartbeat of my child. And I thought, if we make it out, I'll rebuild that room. Not with steel, glass, or concrete, but with memory. With the love I received from people I didn't even know. I spoke of Ellie, Pamela, of the unconditional love journal, of every small light that guided me through the dark. And I ended with a sentence that was later printed on the front page of Architect Weekly. Design isn't just about creating spaces. It's how we show others they deserve to live, to heal, and to be loved, even when they don't know how to ask for it. The entire hall rose in applause. A silver-haired man in the front row wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. After the speech, I received over 100 partnership offers, 2 advisory roles, and a business card from a deputy executive at the Federal Children's Health Organization. 3 days later, the speech was posted on YouTube. Within 2 weeks, it had over 2 million views. News outlets started referring to me as the single mother rebuilding hospitals from her daughter's survival story. I read the first article at my old kitchen table, once buried under rejection letters. Ellie sat nearby, drawing. "Mom," she chirped, "in the building you designed, will there be chairs for us to read stories?" I nodded, my eyes misty. "There'll even be elephant-shaped pillows like the one you love." That same week, headlines started circulating about Evans Law. A Seattle evening broadcast reported, one of the city's oldest law firms is under investigation for tax fraud, embezzlement of credit trust funds, and conflict of interest in hospital construction contracts. My father's name appeared clearly in the subtitle. I stared at the screen, feeling something unfamiliar. Not satisfaction. Not anger. Just a quiet stillness. As if I were watching a tide finally recede, leaving behind broken pieces I no longer had to clean up. News about Nathan surfaced a few days later. A national healthcare firm canceled his legal consultancy contract at the last minute, after journalists uncovered a string of internal emails showing he tried to conceal conflicts of interest between my father's firm and a plot of land being negotiated for a hospital project in Montana. That land, ironically, was part of the design I had just won the bid for. I was in a meeting with the construction team when a call from an unknown number came through. I let it ring. An hour later, my assistant, a college student I once mentored through a community internship, knocked gently on the door. "Director Evans, there are 2 people here to see you. They say they're family." I stood up without a word. And as I stepped out into the hallway, I saw them, my father and Nathan, sitting in the waiting room. They didn't look anything like the people I used to know. My father was no longer wearing his sleek Italian suit, but an old jacket with a wrinkled collar. His silver hair was disheveled. Nathan had his hands clenched tightly, his face drawn tight like a snapped wire. I stepped in. They both stood up at once. Nathan spoke first, his tone more sharp than soft. "We need to talk. About Montana." I looked at them, still holding the half-poured coffee carafe. "I don't do business based on bloodlines," I said evenly. You can contact the hospital's legal department if this concerns the construction site. My father took a deep breath and stepped back. His eyes scanned the office, pausing at a photo of me and Ellie taken the day she was discharged from the hospital. Then his gaze landed on the words engraved above the lounge corner. We don't build spaces from materials but from survival. Gianna, he said, his voice hoarse. I know what happened before. Maybe you'll never forgive us. But the firm is in trouble now. The family's falling apart. If you could. I interrupted him gently but firmly. When I begged my parents to help save their granddaughter, you sent security to throw me out of the party. Now that the family's real estate depends on a contract I signed, you come asking for cooperation. Nathan gritted his teeth. You don't have to be petty. I laughed. No, I've just stopped being stupid. I set the cup down on the table, looking straight into my father's eyes. Back then you told me, family is about knowing how to calculate. Well, now I'm calculating the rest of my life, and it doesn't include the people who turned away when I was at my lowest. My father said nothing. Nathan stayed silent too. They left a few minutes later without a goodbye, leaving only the echo of their footsteps down the granite hallway. I returned to the meeting room, reopened the unfinished plans and continued. Because now I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was the one who vanished from their game, only to build a world they no longer had a place in. I thought what happened with my father and Nathan was the end of their attempts to pull me back in. I was wrong. They didn't come alone. That morning, I was fine-tuning the color scheme for the pediatric therapy wing when my assistant called into the office. Director Evans, there's a MS. Cynthia Evans and Mr. Richard Evans here to see you. They say they're your biological parents. I stopped mid-motion. On the screen, a shade of soft green had just been added to the glass ceiling above one of the recovery beds. In my mind, I saw Ellie again in the ACU, her pale skin under the white lights, the marks still fresh from the breathing tube. I don't take unannounced appointments, I said. Yes, understood. But they said they only need a few minutes. And they brought documents related to the Montana land case. I paused for a few seconds before replying. Let them in. But seat them in the secondary conference room, not the main one. When I walked in, they were already seated. My mother wore a beige coat, but the fabric no longer carried the elegance it used to. Her face was heavily made up, but the fatigue around her mouth was still visible. My father had on a blue-gray suit no longer pressed to perfection. His collar was crumpled, his cuff buttons mismatched. They looked at me like someone they'd met in a past life, no longer remembering the way to my heart. Hello, sweetheart, my mother spoke first, trying to keep her voice light. Thank you for seeing us. I didn't reply immediately. I opened my bag and placed a small recorder on the table, pressing play. I already told you, her voice echoed from the recording, crackly but clear. She shouldn't have had a child if she couldn't afford it. If my daughter lets that kid die in the hospital, it wouldn't surprise me. She's always been weak and emotional. That's why I never let her inherit the business. The room fell silent. I turned it off. You remember that call, don't you? My mother went pale, glancing at my father, forcing a weak smile. Tane, I didn't know you heard that. Back then I was under a lot of pressure. I didn't mean it. I looked her directly in the eye. You don't need to explain. I'm not here for forgiveness. I just wanted to remind you when I begged you called security. Now that you're the ones begging, I opened the door out of courtesy. My father folded his hands, his back slightly hunched. Gianna, the past, maybe we were all wrong. But the company, the family, is on the brink of collapse. That land is our last shot. If you agree to withdraw the design from Montana or share partial ownership, we can still negotiate with the new investor. I nodded, reached into my bag and pulled out a set of printed documents. I placed them on the table. I've already prepared everything. Mutual agreement contract. Both their faces lit up with hope. I pointed to the clause section. All I need is a signature confirming the removal of my name from the entire Evans family registry. That includes a reissued birth certificate, ancestral will exclusions, and removal from any family asset records. No more ties. No more relations. I no longer belong to this family line. My father froze. You're serious? I've never been more serious. I placed a pen on the table. Either that or there's nothing. My mother pressed her lips together. She looked like she wanted to speak but then pulled her hand back. I didn't feel pain like I thought I would. Just emptiness. So light it almost felt cold. I was your daughter when it served your image. I was the name you used at charity events to prove your family appreciated art. But when I needed a hand, a word of comfort, a check to cover my child's surgery, I had nothing but silence. And a child waiting to die in a hospital bed. My mother burst into tears. Her sobs lost the composed restraint she always carried. She touched my father's hand. Sign it. My father didn't look at me again. He picked up the pen and signed the bottom right corner. I gathered the contract without another word. Everything had been recorded, sealed, and would be delivered to my attorney the next morning. From now on, I said, my voice low but steady, everything I do is for my daughter. For the world I'm rebuilding. And neither of you are in it. As I walked out of the room, I didn't look back. I heard chairs being pushed, slow footsteps trailing behind me. But I wasn't someone who looked back anymore. I was someone moving forward, carrying a heart that had once been torn apart, now stitched together by things they never understood, trust and unconditional love. 6 months after that life-saving surgery, Ellie sat on the wooden bench by the upright piano in the corner of our living room, her tiny feet still not touching the floor. Her small fingers fumbled over the keys. The melody of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star came out clumsy and offbeat, but my heart quieted with a strange, peaceful joy. She giggled when she hit a wrong note, turned to me and said, "Mom, I messed up again." I stepped forward and bent down to kiss her hair. "Every mistake you make when you play is another thing you've learned, sweetheart. And I think your music sounds brighter today than it did yesterday." Ellie beamed like there had never been a scar on her chest, like there had never been those nights soaked in cold sweat with the hum of a breathing machine beside the bed. She had gone back to school, joined the swim club, and just signed up to read at the Fall Children's Book Fair. I watched her run through the backyard, then looked up at our new home. A 2-story house with white walls, a green roof, and a small studio out back just for me and my design team. In one corner of the garden, Pamela planted lavender and carrots. Pamela Monroe, the neighbor who knocked on my door at midnight with an envelope of cash and my husband's wedding ring, is now part of my family. We invited her to move in when she was struggling with her old rental. Ellie calls her Granny Pam, and the two of them water the plants together every morning before breakfast, usually peanut butter and toast. "Who do you think she takes after?" Pamela asked one morning while I brewed coffee and Ellie played the piano. I laughed. "Probably both of us. Stubborn but never gives up." "No," she shook her head, still watching the window. "She's just herself. But it's because she has a mother who never gave up." Her words made me turn away to hide the tear that had quietly slipped down my cheek. That winter, I launched the Ellie Hart Scholarship Fund. Each year, we select 5 single mothers with a passion for design or architecture but little access to education. The fund covers full tuition for trade school, offers one-on-one mentorship, and provides emotional support through a community of fellow parents. The first application I read had a handwritten line, "I thought I wasn't good enough to start over, until I read your story." I stopped reading, my hand still gripping the edge of the page. Pamela stood behind me and gently laid her hand on my shoulder. "The seed landed in the right place, Gianna. Now you're planting more." Every month, the Ellie Hart group holds a gathering in the studio behind my house. Each person brings a sketch, a story, or sometimes just a cup of tea. Together, we rebuild small pieces of the world they thought had collapsed. A room for a child with hearing loss, a kitchen for a mom selling coffee on the street, a work nook in a 200-square-foot apartment. The media started paying attention. The woman who vanished from the prestigious Evans family rebuilt a community from her own cracks. One local newspaper ran that headline. A month later, I got an email from a PBS reporter. They wanted to do a feature on the model I'd created, architectural healing from within the community, as I like to call it, rebuilding living spaces with the love of those who've survived them. "What do you believe is at the heart of every project you build?" the reporter asked after the camera was off. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window and saw Ellie helping Pamela trim lavender, her golden hair sparkling in the sun. "Presence," I finally said. "Not bricks, not steel, not furniture. But the feeling you get when you walk into a place and your heart settles. Because you know you're welcome." After the interview aired, I received hundreds of emails from strangers. Some told me they were kicked out for being pregnant. Others were widowed fathers trying to help their daughters find hope again. One letter arrived last. Not by email but through the postal service. The handwriting was careful and neat. You probably don't remember me, but when I was in 4th grade I got lost in the library. You sat down and read with me until my mom came back. That day I thought you were a fairy. I sat with that letter for a long time. Not because I remembered the girl, but because I finally understood. Every kind thing we do, no matter how small, leaves a mark somewhere. Even if we forget, the world doesn't. And through those quiet imprints, I had drawn the outlines of my own family. Not by title or blood, but by choice, by the ones who stayed when no one was required to. That morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, soft as a veil over my shoulders. Ellie woke before me, crawled into bed and pressed her face against my chest. She whispered something that tugged at my heart. "Mom, I'm 7 today, right?" I smiled and kissed her forehead. "That's right. My little princess is 7. And I still can't believe I was lucky enough to see this day." Ellie giggled and snuggled close, then suddenly looked up with big, serious eyes. "But Mommy, why don't I have grandparents like the other kids? Yesterday my teacher asked who was coming to our birthdays, and everyone said their grandma or grandpa would bring cake or presents. But I just have Granny Pam." The question didn't surprise me, but it still pressed somewhere deep I thought I had buried. I sat up, pulled her into my lap, and gently smoothed her sleep-tangled hair. "Sweetheart," I began softly, "some people are born with titles, like grandparents, parents, aunts, and uncles. But there are others who don't need any title at all. They choose to love you with everything they have. You don't have grandparents because they chose to walk away from our lives. But you have a whole army of love out there. People who don't need to be called grandma or grandpa to do anything just to see you smile." Ellie stayed quiet for a few seconds, then tilted her head, curiosity sparkling in her eyes. "So, can I call Granny Pam my real grandma?" I hugged her tight, my voice catching. "Granny Pam is even more than that, sweetheart." The birthday party was held in our backyard, where we set up rows of little tents, colorful string lights, and a long table draped in checkered cloth, topped with cupcakes that Ellie and Pamela had baked the day before. Guests came from everywhere. My design team, some women from the Ellie Heart Circle, our neighbors from Pamela's old block, even the nurse who cared for Ellie after her surgery. Everyone brought a gift, but none were wrapped in glossy paper. Mostly picture books, art supplies, or handwritten notes with photos from when they first met Ellie. I watched her dash across the yard, her pink dress twirling in the sunlight, holding a heart-shaped balloon and calling out to everyone, "Uncle Tony, I remember you were the first to bring bread to Mom. And Miss Denise, I still have the scarf you crocheted." Pamela sat under the garden umbrella, breaking pieces of bread for the sparrows and smiling. I poured her a cup of tea and sat down beside her. "Did you ever think we'd see this day?" I asked, eyes still on Ellie. "No," Pamela said, "but I knew it would come. Because you didn't let go. And because Ellie never stopped living like the world could be beautiful again." I squeezed her hand, feeling like I was holding my mother's. A mother I had found not through blood but through trust. As sunset stretched across the yard, everyone sang happy birthday. Ellie stood in the center of the circle, her eyes shimmering, cheeks flushed. She turned to me as I held out the cake with the number 7 candle on top. "What did you wish for?" I whispered as I knelt beside her. Ellie closed her eyes, then opened them wide, her gaze shining like the sky itself. "I wished for everyone to stay together like this forever." When the candle went out, the applause burst like waves across the yard. I stepped back a few paces, standing on the porch, eyes locked on Ellie as she hugged each guest, receiving gifts that weren't flashy but filled with love. A camera was handed over. Someone called out, "Gianna, get in the photo." I shook my head and stepped back a little more. "Go ahead and take the picture," I said. "I want to see it from a distance. Sometimes distance is where things become the clearest." And in that moment, as the last golden light of the day bathed the backyard, I saw Ellie turn around and reach out to me. "Mom," she called, "come be with our army of love." I stepped down each stair slowly, like walking through a dream. There was no violin playing, no grand cinematic scene. Just the smell of baked goods, the sound of evening birds, and a tiny hand gripping mine tightly. I pulled her into my arms and whispered, You don't have grandparents, sweetheart. But you have an entire world that chose to love you. And so do I. I chose again, starting from you. And in that moment, I understood something more deeply. Something I used to repeat like a motto. Forgiveness isn't a gift we give others. It's the final act we do to reclaim ourselves. Not to forget, but to choose to rebuild from pieces we once thought could never fit again. And rebuild I did. Not a castle. A home. Not with high domes or marble halls, but with laughter echoing daily, and the heartbeat of a child who once clung to life now running wild across the yard, birthday cake in hand, surrounded by an army of love I never had to name. What do you think about my story with Ellie? About a family not born from blood, but formed by the people who stayed when no one asked them to? Have you ever felt like you were standing outside a door that was supposed to be home, but no key you had would fit the lock? If this story touched something in you, even just a small part, please share your thoughts below. I believe each of us has our own journey to find what family truly means. Sometimes it's not in a registry or a last name, but in the way someone makes you tea or sits beside you in silence when you have no words left. And if you'd like to keep walking with me, with Ellie, with Granny Pam, and our little army of love, please subscribe to this channel. The stories to come won't just be about what we've survived, but how we live, love, and keep rebuilding a world where everyone has a place to come home to. Because sometimes the strongest healing doesn't come from doctors or prescriptions, but from someone quietly saying, I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere.